Welcome to this episode of Smart Levers, and today we're going to talk about something called as deliberate practice. What is deliberate practice? Every practice should be deliberate, right, Ramanand? What is this all about?
Right. So think of this way. You are starting to say, learn a new skill. This could be hitting your tennis forehand as you have tried to do, or it could be someone trying to write better. It could be someone who wants to stand up in front of someone and give a speech. Now, the common advice given to everyone in all these situations is that to get better, you need to practice more. And so what we end up doing is we say, yeah, let's start practicing. So tomorrow you will wear a tracksuit or a business suit and you will go into that situation and you start doing a bunch of things over and over again. Now, a psychologist called Anders Ericsson, he studied the world of practice and he said that this is practice, but this is like the lowest rung of practice. This is, it's like naive practice. You have different goals each time. Someday you decide to hit a forehand in the deuce court, and then another day you decide to do it on the advantage court, and sometimes you're doing it from the back of the court. So there are so many different variations, and it can be a very ad hoc sort of a process. So he studied people who were superb at practice, and he realized that there are other rungs to practice. The highest rung is what he called deliberate practice. It's become a kind of a cliche in the last decade or so, thanks in part to people like Malcolm Gladwell, and we'll talk little bit about that famous rule of his that he made popular. So what deliberate practice therefore became was this highest end of practice wherein you are very purposeful. You have a goal in mind, and and the goal can be as specific as that I am going to write the same sentence 100 times and I'm going to try and master a style of sentence, or that I'm going to stand in this particular spot and hit 100 forehands in the same spot until it just keeps landing. It keeps landing. Um, so that's deliberate practice. But I want to add that there is a third uh, element which is in between naive and deliberate practice. It's called purposeful practice. So just to quickly summarize, naive practice is where you just get onto the court and you start hitting some balls in all sorts of directions. In purposeful practice, you have a purpose, you have a goal, you receive feedback of whether you're doing it correctly or wrong, and this can be a very uncomfortable process. And deliberate practice is on top of that, where you have all the elements of purposeful practice, but it's a very defined sort of an environment. So if you're at tennis, you can do deliberate practice. But if you're recording a smartcast, there are so many different variables that it gets very hard to practice just one element. And so it's more purposeful, not really deliberate in the strict sense. And because if you do it like a tennis environment or a music violin learning environment, you can even have a coach who will tell you exactly what you should do to become Roger Federer. Uh, so these are the three elements of practice according to Anders Ericsson.
Yeah. So I think there's one more element there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Raman. Where we also talk about the learning environment. What is wicked, and I think the other one is benign, right? So hitting a forehand might be, something where not a lot changes, but hitting a forehand in a point becomes a wicked learning environment because again the variables are changing. Is that right?
Right. So you have whenever you do learning, you have these stable environments and these wicked or changing
Mm-hmm.
environments, right? So again, for deliberate practice, it's almost like hitting the same note or the same chord 100 times or 1,000 times or 10,000 times, as Malcolm Gladwell will tell you. So in these things don't change. But if you're in a jazz environment, it becomes a lot more wicked because you're playing off different members of the orchestra, and so the kind of practice you will do is at best purposeful. The goal could be to just find a meaningful interplay between all the environments, but you're not going to do the same thing for 1,000 times. So that's the big difference. The environment has to be stable. You might even have a coach who is watching you and saying, okay, let's do this again and again and again in this particular way. And you're essentially building that muscle memory, which is for that specific situation. So if you're in the IPL, then what you're learning is to hit a 6 over point, but you are not learning what do I do if suddenly someone is sledging me and then the wicket is really terrible and it's just rained and the whole place is very damp to kind of bat on. That's your wicket environment.
Right, right. And This is great. This, the notion is great. How have we used this concept of deliberate and purposeful practice?
Right. So, in any kind of skill building environment, whenever you go there as an intervention to help people pick up a new skill, I think just being aware of the fact that there is this distinction between these three or four different types of practice just keeps you grounded. You understand how to set better expectations and what you want people to do. And we all know that there is always a gap between knowledge and practice. You say you have to behave in a particular way, but getting people to actually start incorporating that can be very difficult. So there are many cues that we have taken from understanding purposeful and deliberate practice. So for instance, we do a course on storytelling. Now we want people to be able to practice the art of storytelling. So I think it's closer to purposeful practice. So we realized that we didn't make them do the same story 100 times because they don't have the time for it. That's not what they're looking for. They're not looking to be an expert. And plus it's a wicked game. It's not a stable environment. They're not like trainers who are giving the same piece of content in the same situation in the same room for 100 foreseeable iterations. And so we realize that we create a purpose, we give them feedback, we push them out of their comfort zone. We do a little bit of coaching, but we don't really we don't treat it like a violent teacher would make their students go. So uh, therefore, if you're in a environment where you're passing on a skill to someone and you want to have some element of practice, you know what your limits are going to be.
All right, all right. And for listeners in our audience, why should the notion of deliberate and purposeful practice be part of their, toolkit of smart levers?
So as an up leveler, they are going to be learners, continuous learners for life. And so I'm assuming that they will be reading new things, they will be picking up new courses, and some of it will be in the skill case, which will be you're either picking up a musical instrument, or you're learning how to type better because it helps your productivity, or you're picking up a new tool. So all of these are going to need some element of practice. And because we tend to be naive about practice, whether it is practicing the art of speaking in front of an audience, or whether it is about, say, writing on Slack channels, and wanting to get better at that. So if you're a learner, you will need to know how to effectively practice. And this is not something that we've been taught to do. And so understanding these principles of practice is a great complement to understanding how to absorb new information. So that's why I think all up levelers will benefit from understanding what is deliberate and purposeful practice.
Right. I mean, over the years, people have also said showing up is half the job done, right? I mean, showing up for practice is great, gets you started. Unless you show up, you can't do anything else. But
Yeah,
once you show up, you also need to make sure what kind of practice is being, done. You have to be
yeah.
deliberate
And
about it.
we are familiar with the phrase of the learning curve, and there is this curve where you struggle at first and then things become easier. The idea behind deliberate practice is to really kind of help you navigate that learning curve and hopefully get more productive at it. Maybe the 10th course that you take or the 10th skill that you pick up, you're going to be so much better at it because how to practice so much better.
Right. So, on that note, let's bring this episode to an end and also ask our viewers to give us feedback so that we also get to do more deliberate and purposeful practice in the subsequent episodes. Thanks, Ramanand.